We've already seen some clear examples of how pro-slavery authors misused the Old Testament. Now let's see some examples of how they misused the New Testament. And you won't get any points for saying they screwed that up too. We reflected earlier in this series on the relative silence of Jesus regarding slavery. As you might expect, like today's fundy atheists, pro-slavery writers took this silence as a ringing endorsement. Abolitionists responded pretty much the same as we did, pointing out that there were few or no slaves in Judea at the time of Jesus, and that most of his audience would not have owned slaves. Pro-slavery writers engaged their usual comic talents in reply to this point. One argued that slavery must have existed at the time of Jesus because Jews still had slaves hundreds of years earlier, at the time of Ezra, so they must not have gotten tired of it yet. But that's a bit of a strain. Ezra's account does refer to servants of some sort, but there's no context to tell us whether these servants were hired, or slaves, or clients in a patronage contract. Given that Israel had itself been in exile just shortly before, that these may have been slaves may be seriously questioned. And even so, regardless of what happened in Ezra's time hundreds of years before, we remain sure that by Jesus' time, there was no serious slavery of any sort among the Jews, and what little there may have been would have been restricted to the 1% of the day, a very small and wealthy class with enough resources to purchase slaves. It gets worse, though, as this particular exegete, Mr. Stringfellow, used Jesus' silence as an excuse to claim that Jesus actually did say something positive about slavery. This is how his argument is made with reference to 1 Timothy 6. Here Stringfellow is compelled to admit that he is inventing the notion of an unquoted statement of Jesus on the subject of slavery, which would be impossible if slavery did not exist in Judea among the peasants who were Jesus' chief adherents. But what Stringfellow purposely obscures is that verse 3 comes after an extended number of teachings, including many that we have nothing from Jesus on, such as the disposition of young widows. If Stringfellow is right, 1 Timothy 6:3 compels us to suppose that there were a host of unattested statements of Jesus. However, in reality, it's better to see the reference to the teachings of Jesus as a "this too." In other words, Paul is telling Timothy to have others adhere to the teachings that Paul himself has laid out, along with the teachings of Jesus. There was a particularly good argument made by abolitionists in response to pro-slavery writers who appealed to New Testament slavery, as well as Genesis 9 and the curse on Canaan. The latter, as we noted, was used by pro-slavery authors to justify their right as descendants of Japheth to supposedly enslave descendants of Ham. But in the New Testament world, what we would have had was mostly people considered descendants of Japheth enslaving each other. That led to an obvious question. What would keep someone like Drisler from enslaving someone, say, like Hopkins? Yeah, they didn't know what to say about that either.